But kicking us off this morning, we have Joe Razza. Joe is the head of product and design at KnowledgeHound. He's passionate about identifying and structuring both the short and long-term product strategy to ensure that they continue to deliver a world-class experience for market researchers and insights professionals. When he's not designing product enhancements and features, you can find him making homemade Italian dishes or sipping espresso, as we just talked about. He's got some fun pictures, apparently, of him sipping espresso throughout the world. Go ahead, Joe.
Sure do. Thanks a lot, Tiffany. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone waking up early to listen to me. I hope you have your coffee. I do over here. That's what I run on. And today, I'm going to start by sharing my screen to make sure technology is playing well with us. All right. Thumbs up, Tiffany. Can we see the screen? Yes?
Yeah, I can see.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Sorry, on me. Yes, you're great.
Yeah. So we like to be punny at KnowledgeHound, and part of this talk resonates really well with the coffee theme. And as the leader of the product team, you know, and being here for 7 years, we sit on a lot of usage data and have the luxury of kind of understanding this concept of keeping research hot, not letting it go cold. And you know, no one really likes it when your hot coffee goes cold. And I can't imagine, you know, there are too many insights teams that like it or like the concept of their research going cold. So, and just hearing that concept of research going cold, when Emily and I were kind of concepting what we can talk about for this talk, kind of elicited a lot of the talks that I've sat through over the years in other research conferences around, you know, teams being thought of as cost centers as opposed to revenue drivers, and that concept of research getting cold and being forgotten or lost is definitely in line with that. So what we've done to prep for this talk is leverage years worth of our own usage data from the KnowledgeHound platform to start gaining a unique insight into what keeps research hot at some of the world's leading brands. And since I've actually never spoken in my 7 years being at KnowledgeHound at a market research event, I figured I'd talk about myself for 5 seconds. But my story begins about 7.5 years ago when I joined KnowledgeHound. And thanks to Tiffany for the great intro. But today I lead the product team, and like so many researchers, I am also at KnowledgeHound a connection between our customers, their needs, and our business, doing a lot of qualitative user research myself. And I happen to really enjoy coffee. Thank my wife for the montage of me drinking espresso around the world. So this is a perfect talk for me to do. But that's my story. And if we go back a little further in time, we'll arrive at kind of the beginning of the story of KnowledgeHound. And our story begins in a conference room in Boston with a fairly simple question. It's on the screen. What percentage of men shave in the shower? You're having a conference room, you're talking about some innovation. Simple question comes up. Now, this is a question that the team knew that they had data on in order to answer it. So, I mean, really what seems to be the problem, Joe? It doesn't seem like there's a problem, but really what had happened here was the data had gone cold. There wasn't access to the answer, and while this story particularly does end on a good note with the answer being delivered, that was only several days later after several back and forth emails, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of the story of how we've gotten to today and how we have some really interesting, I like the concept of not wanting data to get cold. So what percentage of research data has KnowledgeHound seen, and what percent of that do we deem to be cold? Well, one of our wonderful teams set out to measure that about a year ago. And we're kind of calling that a waste metric, as that team described it. And I was kind of alarmed at across all the studies, hundreds, if not thousands of studies at the time when this was done had been loaded. how much of an entire survey is inaccessible. And when I say inaccessible, meaning how much of the possible insights from a study are available in the final report that is the traditional delivery method. And you can see here the average being somewhere around 80% waste metric. So we're kind of already off on a cold thought there. But what about storytelling and accessing data to tell that story? So with data often stored in different systems across multiple file types, and I'm sure we've heard the whole silos thing, silos of data, whether that's files or actual data, operational data. There's just, what about storing that across multiple systems? There lacks unity to gather the data to tell your story. And so how are we consistently painting a clear picture when we're working with incomplete sets of information, or having to browse silo after silo looking for pieces of a story to communicate? Problem number 2 that Gillette team faced. And problem number 3 that Gillette team faced was that in that conference room with that simple question, they weren't able to easily answer that question. And time is something that we almost seemingly never have enough of. And yet the world around us is moving faster. And now we're at home in COVID, teaching our children math. I don't have children, I don't know what that's like, but I'm also cooking pasta apparently for lunch and doing other things. So time is yet becoming even more finite. And traditional means of accessing and leveraging research data is slow. And we no longer have the luxury of spending hours upon hours analyzing, interpreting, charting, looking through pivot tables, etc. So out of these problems, KnowledgeHound was created to address these shortcomings, but with a distinct take on the management of research data. Again, looking at that waste metric, we were looking at how much are you typically finding insightful in a solitary single point in time final report document versus having access to the underlying data. And so KnowledgeHound focuses on capturing and organizing the underlying respondent survey data as opposed to cataloging and organizing final reports and documents. And this isn't going to be a document bashing talk anyway, so I'll touch on that next. But what KnowledgeHound does is creates a unified place to access survey data so that anyone, insights team or business partner alike, can discover new insights and, like in our original story, quickly answer business questions. And we do that in a pretty unique way, leveraging APIs and data partnerships with the likes of AYTM, I might add, and with key research suppliers to make gathering that data fast and stressless. Take a sip of my coffee. And so what does it look like for companies like P&G and Twitter and Fandango to keep their data warm? What does that look like? Well, it so happens that this year, I started to look at our usage data to sort of address this very concept. We have about 5 years worth of data across 40 of the largest brands and now thousands of studies loaded. And we can start to look at the types of surveys loaded, analyses conducted, dashboards built, data points exported, etc., to understand the impact that having access to the underlying survey data is having on keeping data warm versus the traditional final reports, PowerPoints, and Excel sheet handoff. And while we're still working to fundamentally measure this, some of the early analyses are pretty interesting. Great. And so, yes, I don't want to bash final reports because they definitely are important, and they're an important part of how we communicate after we're done doing analyses. It's a great tool. I'm using essentially a final report right now to communicate to you all. So I don't want to come off as dismissive of their role. That said, what we found is a pretty big gap between the total possible answers available in a traditional final report versus what is essentially 100% of the possible answers available if you actually house, store, and access the respondent level survey data file. And that's a pretty big gap. So you can understand how that Gillette team, if they didn't have quick access to a final report and that data point happened to be already charted in there, how searching around for the answer took days instead of when it should have taken minutes. So knowing that, what I've done recently with the help of Emily, so Emily, shout out to you for helping me sift through a lot of data, is we wanted to look at data consumption over time and start to see, is there a difference in keeping data warm over time? We all know that, and I was especially interested to start looking at the data lately, given how impactful COVID-19 has been on our habits across the board, let alone changes in our work life. So we set out to compare consumption over time for documents versus data, and here's what we found so far. So we have a traditional time across our horizontal axis. We have consumption high to essentially lost and forgotten. And we're all used to emailing out or receiving new findings via PowerPoint or email. And we know that consumption of that is extraordinarily high. Well, we love getting answers to our business questions in our inbox. Our business partners consume them at a high consumption rate, but for a very short period of time. And it's no dissimilar to our habits in social media, scrolling, liking, scrolling, and not being able to find that post again. Or if it's in fast fashion, you're just buying and you're going and you're buying and you're going. A lot of that is happening with sending out links to Drive or emails. And so what we see is a really high drop off. We see high consumption, drop off, and then we see moments in time for about 2 months or so where maybe a question is asked again and that final report can be sent out again. And so we see little blips of engagement in a traditional research data method. Now, what we did was look at our usage data in KnowledgeHound of how the consumption of the raw data looks over time. And what we found is, although there's a very slight difference in the engagement early on, as we can see, the engagement is a lot more long lasting. And the reason for that is not only can you share out via a dashboard or a link to the survey data, but you can continue to come back over time to discover more answers. And what we see is that there are these kind of moments in time in the middle of the year, and I'm going out about a year. We've been looking at this data recently, and there are moments in time where we get really big increases in consumption across a couple of users. And I'm defining consumption as usage data that we see where customers are logging in, they're actually analyzing a data point from a survey, and they're actually exporting that data or adding it to a dashboard. So they're actually doing something with it. And whether that's for planning purposes, or again, you get an ad hoc question and you're able to leverage the data to recut it, to get it out to your business partners, what we start to see is a gap between what you're able to do with the final reports over time and how those seem to get lost and forgotten in those silos, and what you're able to achieve when you have access in the cloud to the actual 100% of the possible answers that you have. And I haven't quite fundamentally called this anything yet, but there's definitely an opportunity gap in between the final report method and the KnowledgeHound method. A couple of other interesting data points that we've been uncovering is that 20% of the studies across our customer base that were being consumed a year ago are still actively being consumed today. And how I measured that was by looking again a year ago in Q3 across all of the studies that were accessed, how many of those studies had analyses being conducted on it, charts being created, charts being exported or shared or added to dashboards, compared to what percent of those today still have active usage. And that's pretty incredible if you think that the life cycle of a research project doesn't have to really end after that final report is sent out, that you can get more value out of it by leveraging the data. And in some cases, surveys over 2 years old in KnowledgeHound are still being leveraged today. And these aren't just trackers where you would expect that, where you get wave after wave after wave. We have a lot of surveys that are fairly old, important pieces of data that can either help to inform the research team of where to go, or help you know what you know if you're doing research on, say, a new topic and you're getting ready for that next round of data. It helps to be informed so that we can do less repetitive research now and be more agile, cost savings, all of that thing, speed up time. And so that's a little bit of the story, a little bit of the data that we've uncovered around how a lot of the world's leading teams are keeping their data hot by using the power of the respondent level survey data in the KnowledgeHound platform. And with that little tidbit this morning, I'd like to thank you for spending some time with me, and I'm happy to take some questions. And we love dogs, so obligatory dog yeah. Question there.
We also love dogs in this end. That's awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation, Joe. It's so true that, you know, survey data, you know, having it consolidated in an area like this so that it's available in an ongoing fashion is so important. And we obviously love our integrations with the KnowledgeHound, and our clients tap into them quite often. So feel free, anyone in the audience, to take yourself off mute and jump in and ask questions, or you can post them in the chat.
Yeah, I'll try to get my chat up here in case someone does. Chat. Maybe there are no questions. Well, this is, I have to say, this is really fairly new stuff from our team, and so I'm not surprised there aren't questions. We have so many questions over here that we're continuing to dig into this data to really help to measure the difference that, you know, leveraging the raw data can have over just trying to leverage artifacts and Excel spreadsheets, pivot tables, banner books, etc.
Yeah.
Hey Joe, it's Shannon. How are you?
Shannon, hi.
Good to see you. How you doing?
Hey, nice to see you too.
Good. I have a question for you. I know that, you know, you've got all I'm well aware of your tool and how amazing it is to tap into that data. But one of the problems I always saw was like what you just shared. It was, you know, you do habits and practices, you'd get the data in, and then that data would be hot for a very short time, right? Or people would tap into it for, like, innovation teams would tap into it to figure out what's changing, particularly in habits and practices, because they're trying to figure out, like, what products should we bring into the world and how are we addressing changing needs. But one of the, I mean, I always saw like it was just dependent, and then you had to wait till the next habits and practices. You had to wait. Have you considered at all looking at kind of where your hot topics, particularly probably around what's changing, like what, because that's what people care about a lot in any category, right? In running your own studies, instead of waiting for the P&Gs of the world to give you studies to load up, to proactively say, like, I know people are digging deep here, let's go run studies and make ourselves useful proactively and track people over time, because that was always the problem for us. So just wondering.
So yeah, so have we, yes, there's, without giving away maybe too much secret sauce about the future, but yeah, so we're in a unique position to be able to look at real data loaded by our customers questions that are being asked by business partners who are accessing the platform, and understanding current world trends, right, that are happening from either secondary data sources, the news, the world. And yeah, there's going to definitely be something very interesting that we're going to be able to do sitting on all of that data to help, not necessarily potentially survey for our customers, but it's potentially connecting them to, have you thought about, or you have data on this trending topic in the world. You might want to leverage that as opposed to just assuming that you need to go out and spend some more money on some more research. But with some of our partners like AYTM, when we have a data integration, if you will, you can think that, well, we can get data from a source like AYTM into a place like KnowledgeHound, but how can we also push out concepts and questions to AYTM to then automatically run surveys from within a platform like KnowledgeHound, and then just complete the circle? And so helping to get research done faster, potentially one-offs, or seeing that you do have a data point that addresses like a trending topic today, but maybe it might be a little old and it might need to be refreshed. Well, how could you refresh that with like a couple clicks of a button and get that data back into KnowledgeHound and get like a refresh of that data? These are some of the concepts that we've been thinking about. So we're not quite there yet, but I love where your head's at, Shannon. I think that there is a lot of opportunity there.
Cool, thank you. I can't wait to see what you guys do.
Thanks for the question, appreciate it. I'm not much of a question asker in the morning.
Coffee drinker instead.
I am.
Awesome.
Well, thanks again, Tiffany. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of share out some of these early findings with some folks, and I look forward to continuing to dig into this data and kind of fundamentally formulate some really interesting metrics around keeping the data warm.
Yeah, awesome. Appreciate you jumping on so early today. Wanted to let
My
everyone
pleasure.
I did want to let everyone know that we do have the next session coming up. Sarah Snedden's going to be speaking on leveling up your DIY powers. So I will post that link in the chat channel, or you can move over to that next. And thank you again, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it, everyone. Stay safe. Be well.